Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 35 complete wildcard draft. Anyone that has the chip active this week, hopefully this video will be very useful for you. But even if you've not got the chip active, hopefully you can still gain something and help you navigate Game Week 35 to 38. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So I thought a useful starting point would just be to refresh our memory about what are the upcoming fixtures for the final 4 game weeks of the season. Only 4 game weeks left now. I get a little bit emotional towards the back end of the season. This has actually been a very difficult season for me in FPL. And I know you'll see, which way is it? This way. You'll see 45k above my head, which isn't an awful rank, but I was 3 million after like game week 8, and I've just found it very difficult this year, but I still feel emotional and I still don't want the season to end. But specifically focusing on wildcard, you've got 4 weeks now, and one of the limitations, I suppose, was that playing your wildcard late, you've only got 4 weeks, but I guess you could spin that on its head and say, you can now play a wildcard with only 4 weeks in mind. You've got 2 double game weeks. You can attack the fixtures. You can think about which teams have stuff to play for and which players are being rotated, and you can pick the best team to end the season. Because in my position, I wildcarded in game week 30. I've got 3 or 4 injuries. I've got players that are rotation risk, single game weekers for double game week 37. So my team looks a bit of a mess. So this is definitely the time where if you've been patient and you've held your wildcard, you can finally make the most of it and hopefully win your mini leagues. So, to remind yourself of the fixtures, Game Week 35 and Game Week 37 are the 2 remaining doubles, but remember that Game Week 35 is only a double game week for 2 teams. So Chelsea and Spurs both double in Game Week 35. Chelsea have Villa and Spurs, and then Spurs have Arsenal and Chelsea. So neither of them have particularly good doubles, and Spurs in particular is really not a nice one because one of their fixtures is against Arsenal. But the reason that lots of people, and I will probably suggest doing something similar, will load up on Chelsea and Spurs players in their Game Week 35 wildcard is because they also double in 37. So the only 2 teams with 2 more double game weeks this season are Chelsea and Spurs, and therefore, whilst they aren't the best fixtures, you're just getting additional appearance points from these players at the very least, and you just never know what could happen in a single game. That being said, as I'll discuss a bit later, I don't think you have to go for 6. You will see lots of content creators and people will suggest you have to go for 6 because they've got extra fixtures. We've seen in the past, extra fixtures doesn't always equate more points. It often does, and to be honest, it usually does, but not necessarily. Like if there's another player that's got 1 or 2 less fixtures, but you think they are significantly better, maybe you go that way. But Chelsea and Spurs, I think should definitely make up at least 3 or 4 spots in your wildcard just due to the sheer quantity of fixtures. And you would say overall that Chelsea's fixtures are slightly stronger than Spurs. After that, you've then got 4 further teams that all double in 37, which is Brighton, Newcastle, Man City, and Man United. So those are the 6 teams, including Chelsea and Spurs, that double in 37. And I would say that probably if you're bench boosting in 37, 12 to 13 at least of your players in your wildcard should really probably double in 37. And if you're not bench boosting, you're probably looking at a minimum of maybe 8 or 9. Because then obviously if you field like 9 or 10 doublers and then you've got the rest of single game week players on your bench, that works perfectly well. So I think that should be your rough benchmark of how many doublers you want. And if I'm looking at, from a fixture perspective, who has the best remaining fixtures of the teams that double, Fantasy Football Hub actually have it as Brighton, because this is sorted by fixture difficulty. I would argue it's probably Newcastle. I really like Newcastle's fixture run of Sheffield United, Burnley, a decent double against Brighton and Man United, and then Brentford. The issue is Newcastle are much stronger at home, and they've only got 2 remaining home fixtures this season. So the nice fixtures against Manchester United, Burnley and Brentford, they are good fixtures, but they're also away from home, which obviously isn't ideal. After that, I then think it is probably Manchester United. Then we're looking at then we're looking at Brighton and Man City. But to be honest, all 4 of those teams have pretty good fixtures. So again, I do think they should probably form the bulk of your wildcard. Outside of that, I do think there are a couple of interesting conversations to be had. The first being around teams that don't have any remaining double game weeks, but do have really strong single fixtures. So I think there are a few teams that stand out. Nottingham Forest are a team that stand out as having pretty good fixtures other than their fixture in Game Week 35 against Manchester City, which isn't ideal. Luton even have arguably okay fixtures, but you're probably not looking to load up there. Brentford and Palace are 2 teams that I think have some pretty decent assets. And actually, in the weeks that you might need them, they've not got awful fixtures. And I think Brentford in particular I wouldn't mind punting on someone like a Reguilon or an Mbeumo in your draft if you just want to think, do you know what? I think the doubles are a bit of a trap. I quite like the idea of going for a player that has good fixtures but maybe doesn't necessarily double. I doubt many people on Wildcard would go for someone like a Reguilon, but he could outscore some of these doublers because his fixtures are actually really strong and he's got some attacking threat. The only other two teams that do deserve some discussion is Arsenal and Liverpool, right? Because let's assume that they win midweek, which I don't know. I'm recording this on Monday evening. So let's assume they win their midweek games. If going into game week 35, 36, maybe creeping towards 37, they are still in the title race, or at least battling with each other, they're going to have to go pretty much full strength. And it may come down to goal difference. I could imagine that lots of people on their wildcard will go completely without Arsenal and Liverpool and Arsenal will just go on an absolute rampage and win like 3 or 4-0 every game, and they might regret it. So I'm not sitting here saying for a second that I would load up on Liverpool and Arsenal on a wildcard. I absolutely would not. But let's say you're not wildcarding and you're watching this. Thank you, by the way, for doing so. Maybe you hold on to those assets. It could be a nice differential. And I have not seen a single wildcard draft with Salah and Saka. I'm not saying, again, you have both of them, but could you have one? Absolutely. So I wouldn't disregard Liverpool and Arsenal as options, but you certainly don't want to load up. So just to recap that before we move on to looking at my shortlist and then the eventual team, I think the two teams that you should have at least 3 or 4 from are Chelsea and Spurs. The rest of the team would primarily be made up of Brighton, Newcastle, Man City and Man United, probably with a specific focus on Newcastle and Man City. And then if you've got a couple of remaining spots, do take a look at some of the other teams like Brentford that have good fixtures but don't double, and then maybe consider having 1, 2 or maybe 3 assets from Arsenal and Liverpool. So those are the upcoming fixtures. Let's now take a look at my shortlist. So guys, I did this for my Game Week 30 wildcard and I found it very useful and you guys also found it useful as well. So I've created a bit of a shortlist for the players that I would be considering in each of the positions based on budget, mid-priced and premium. So if you've got really poor team value, you can choose a lot from the budget section. This list is not exhaustive, and what I mean by that is I've probably missed off some players that maybe deliberately, maybe I've just forgotten them. But this is kind of the core players where I've built a few different variations and they're pretty much only considering players from these teams here. Oh, sorry, from this short list here. So you can see the list isn't massive. And I will say, when you get onto my draft, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. And it might look like a lot of your drafts and other drafts that you've seen in different content creators' videos. But I think there is good reason for that. And what you have to realize is that a very, very, very small percentage of the player base actually still have their wildcard left. So playing the wildcard is a massive differential. And picking 11 very good players or 15 very good players is enough. You don't have to go crazy with it. Even if in your mini leagues, like you're 100 points behind and you feel like you have to go different, I would almost guarantee that if you just wildcard the best optimal team, or at least a very good team, it's still probably very different to those around you unless they've also got their wildcard. So the list that I've got here is kind of assuming bench boost 37. But if you're not bench boosting 37, all it means is that you don't have to pick as many doublers, right? So you could load up on more from Liverpool, Arsenal, Brentford, Palace, some of these other teams that also have good fixtures, but that don't double in 37. So, with that being said, very briefly, just going to run through the list, then I'll show you the 15 that I would be selecting at the moment, but there is lots of information that we're waiting on around injuries, midweek fixtures as well, so it could definitely change. In goal, I don't actually see many budget options. You could go for a real budget option if you wanted to, but I just don't see the value in doing it. Again, especially if you're on a bench boost. If you're not on a bench boost and you think one keeper will see you through for the end of the season, then maybe you would do that. And then maybe you could just have like, I don't know, like a Kelleher or a Strakosha or someone on the bench that's super cheap. When we're looking at goalkeeper pairings, if you're on a bench boost, I do think ideally you want 2 keepers that double. So the 4 that I would be choosing between is Petrovic, Onana, Vicario, and Ederson. Maybe Verbruggen deserves to be on here. And now I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, yeah, Verbruggen probably does deserve to be on here. And maybe he's the cheapest option that you could potentially go for. I really don't mind Verbruggen. But I just always worry that Steele could just get one game. And if he does get the one game in double game week 37, then you've lost all of the value of actually selecting him. But most Brighton fans seem to think Verbruggen's nailed. Dubravka is the other keeper that's not on here, simply because Pope is still expected to be back before the end of the season. If he's not, Dubravka is arguably better than all of these. But I've left them off for those reasons. So really it's between Petrovic, Onana, Vicario, and Ederson. I would 100% have Onana. And before you say this is Man United bias, it's because the rest of the Man United team stink. So for me, when you're choosing a goalkeeper, Onana averages something like 5 saves per 90. It's absolutely bonkers because Man United are so bad. And when I look at clean sheets, they're not really happening for that many teams. So why not just go for Onana, who at least get you some save points over these fixtures? So I really like Onana. And then I would probably pick a Chelsea or a Spurs goalkeeper to partner with him, right? Petrovic, Vicario, it's up to you, really. Lots of people want more Chelsea attackers. Lots of people won't trust the Chelsea defence, but I would argue you don't trust the Spurs defence either. But partnering him with one of those two makes a lot of sense. And then you've got Edison, you've got Pickford. There are various options here. Just pick 2 goalkeepers that you like the look of, and hopefully that rotate fairly well. In defence, I think it really comes down to actually your attack. So I'm not going to go through every defender in loads of detail because it comes down to what spots do you have left. Because if you're going for 3 Newcastle attackers, let's say you got like Wilson, Isak, Gordon, I wouldn't suggest you do, then you won't have any spots in defence. If you're only going for 1 Newcastle attacker, you've got 2 Newcastle spots. Same with Man United. Let's say you've got Garnacho and Fernandes and Onana, well then you've got no Man United spot. So it really is up to you where you want to distribute the players because you will have a lot of triple ups probably in this team. But in the budget options, Gusto, if he's fit and available, there are rumours going around at the moment that he might be injured. If he is injured, then obviously don't select him. Maybe that makes you more likely to pick Petrovic. Van Heck, I still think, despite him not being a great option, fairly cheap, and at least he has the fixtures and the doubles. Van de Ven, so you doggy's out for the season now, so I had to remove him from this list. Van de Ven's your cheapest route into the Spurs defence. I don't love it, but you just never know what you might get from him, and at least, again, he has the double-double. Maguire will play every remaining game for Man United this season because they are riddled with injuries, but is he a great option? Maybe not. Same issue with Dalot as well. I would say some of the best defenders on Wildcard 35 is actually the Newcastle defence, but again, they've got some really good attackers too, and their defensive data hasn't been great this season, but Burn, Fabian Schär, and if he's fit and available, Kieran Trippier could all be really nice options. So I would have at least 1 Newcastle defender probably. You do still have an option in defence if you want to go for a Spurs defender. Pedro Porro is absolutely fine. He is quite expensive though, and we don't know if he'll be available again. If he's a doubt, then you definitely don't want to go for Porro because really one of the doubles that you want him for is this immediate double here. If you lose him for 35, considering the fixture in 36 and then going into 37, maybe you just don't need a Spurs defender at all. And then the only remaining players are, questionable. We'll start with Man City. My issue with Guardiola now is that Man City have pretty much a fully, I think they do, unless I'm wrong, I think they've got a fully fit defence at the moment. You've got Ake, Walker, Diaz, Stones, Akanji, Gvardiol, all of these, Rico Lewis. There are so many players that can play in that defence. I just don't even think Gvardiol's fully nailed. But if I were to go for a City defender, it would probably still be him. And I would still be very tempted. But do you trust that they're going to play every game? And again, if they don't play every game, are they even worth it? Why not just go for someone like a Gabriel or Saliba? Yes, they've got 1 less fixture, but if the player that you're picking that has 1 extra fixture is rested in one of them or rotated, well, then they don't have 1 extra fixture, right? So I would have at least 1 Arsenal defender. I truly, truly think there is justification to go for double Arsenal defence on wildcard. No, they're not great in 37, but they just keep so many clean sheets, and they've actually got 2 really good home fixtures in the final 4. So Gabriel and Saliba are absolutely good options, as is Ben White if you think he'll start all of the remaining games. Into the midfield, I think there are lots of really good budget options. You could comfortably pick 4 of these budget options in Garnacho, Palmer, Gordon and Gross. I just think that some of them are slightly better given the fixtures, the doubles and the output. So Palmer and Gordon for me are probably fairly good options. In the sort of mid-price options, by the way, Pascal Gross will be in no one's wildcard drafts. If you want a cheeky punt, no, Brighton have not been attacking fairly well and Gross's data isn't perfect. But he is on penalties when João Pedro isn't on the pitch. And also the fixtures aren't terrible for Brighton and they've got the double. So Pascal Gross, a cheeky budget option if your team value is really low. In the mid-price, I think there are some good options, but I think these are also, some of them are quite unreliable this season. So starting with Richarlison, only if he's fully fit. And I would argue even if Richarlison's fully fit, he doesn't start every game. So I don't love Richarlison, but if he does get the fully cleared, he's definitely fit by Ange, he's in full team training, I do think Richarlison goes back into that starting 11 and starts most of their games. But does he start every remaining game? I can't see it. So again, maybe not the best option. Maddison will start every remaining game, but he's been subbed off early quite a few times, and his data's not been good, and he's not passing the eye test. So I look at Maddison, he's fine as a pick, but is he better than some of these other options? Even the budget options I maybe prefer to Maddison. So I'm not so sure about him myself. Phil Foden is an absolutely fine pick, as is Kevin De Bruyne, by the way. The biggest differential you can possibly have on wildcard, get KDB in your team. Big game, Kev. I think he'll finish the season well. As long as Man City don't wrap up the title before the start of Game Week 37, you'd expect him to play most of the remaining games. And then Game Week 38, you can just sell him for someone like Saka or Salah if you don't have them on your wildcard. So I genuinely think if you can get KDB in and you don't feel like you're sacrificing elsewhere, he could be the man. Bruno Fernandes will be very popular. He's the man on the thumbnail as well. We'll discuss Bruno in more detail in the next section because, spoiler alert, he is potentially in that team. I just think he's very reliable for minutes. He's on penalties. His data recently has been good and the fixtures are there. That is all it is with Bruno. No one thinks Man United are good, but Man United don't have to be good for Bruno to get a haul. We saw against Coventry, Man United were not very good, especially in the second half. But Fernandes still got a double-digit haul. What he would have got a double-digit haul in FPL. So Fernandes is a good option. And then Saka and Salah. I mean, it's really up to you. Do you go for Saka? Do you go for Salah? Do you go for either? Both? Neither? It's really up to you. But I think there is justification to maybe go for one, because I do think it will be a differential on your wildcard, because most will probably drop both of them. Also, Heung-min Son, obvious pick, given the fixtures. In the attack, I do think two of them make more sense than the others, which is Haaland and Isak. And again, we'll discuss them more in the next section. Who you partner that with is really up to you. But João Pedro, Højlund, and Jackson, I think, are all very, very good options. You could justify having all of them. The one that's not on this list that everyone will say, how is he not on the list, is Ollie Watkins. The fixtures aren't there. But if you are not fixture-driven and you just say he is that good, just pick Ollie Watkins, because he probably will outscore João Pedro, Højlund, and Jackson. Even a Solanke could do well as well. But I think when you're looking at that third and final spot, I would take a bit of a punt based on the fixtures. So, I've spoken about those players for far too long there. I said I'd do it a little bit quicker than that. Let's now move on to my actual draft and look at the 15 that, as of Monday evening, I'm currently selecting. So, guys, I'm going to just take you through the team sort of position by position, but because I've just spoke about some of the players, this won't be as long as my normal team selection video, this part. So I'll just fly through them and just maybe just add a little bit of detail for each player as to why they're in there. Onana I spoke about purely for the saves. Man United stink. I'm fully aware of that. But I would have one or two United assets due to the fixtures, due to the extra fixture too. And Onana is good for FPL. If you look, he's one of the top scoring keepers this season. So this isn't a Man United love thing. It's just genuinely from an FPL perspective, you could definitely do worse. And if he keeps a clean sheet, he is getting you a minimum of 8 or 9 points. In most times, he's going to be getting you 10 or 11 at the moment, because Man United are conceding 30 shots a game. So he probably won't get you any clean sheets, but if he does, you're laughing, because you'll be getting a lot of points. I have got Vicario in here, mainly because if I don't have Vicario, I've literally got one Spurs asset. You can see, no defenders, only one of the attackers, which is Heung-min Son. So it just feels ridiculous going into a double-double with only one Spurs asset. And really, all of the keepers aren't particularly good. Verbruggen you could put in there, but Verbruggen doesn't make many saves. Neither does Vicario, by the way, but at least Vicario's got an extra fixture. And also, maybe with a few injuries to that Spurs team, maybe they concede more shots and he makes more saves. It really just is, I don't like any of the goalkeepers. You could go for like a David Raya, by the way, but Raya doesn't make any saves. Without the extra fixture, he's got a really low ceiling. So I just think with Vicario, it's process elimination. I don't like any of them. If we got information that Dubravka was going to be nailed for the remainder of the season, I think Dubravka is a serious good option. If Pope is suddenly back for like 36, you could maybe pick Pope on your wildcard, play Onana in 35, and if you have to play Onana, play him in 36. Really, where you need the Newcastle goalkeeper, because you've got Onana, is just really for 37 for that potential bench boost. So, yeah, I think those will be the two. By the way, this is assuming that you are on some sort of bench boost 37. If you're not, you can select more single game week players in game week 37. The back five, very much up in the air. And like I said, this is dependent upon various pieces of injury information coming in. But Gusto is in there. If he is an injury doubt or he's completely ruled out, I would go for Petrovic and probably Porro, but only if Porro is obviously cleared as fit, and we don't yet know that at the moment. So Vicario, Gusto could be Porro and Petrovic. I probably would try to have one from each, again, just due to the extra fixtures. Newcastle defence-wise, I think you could arguably justify having Dubravka, Pope, Schär, Trippier, Burn, all of these different options, but there are good attackers as well. So I've only got one at the moment, and just due to the fact that we know he's fit at the moment, Fabian Schär is in there. If Trippier is almost available / confirmed as being fit, I'd be very tempted to have Kieran Trippier. I mean, this draft for me, based on my team value, I've got 3.1 in the bank. So you've got the money to go there if you want to, and I think he's a very, very cheeky differential on the wildcard. But at the moment, I've just got Fabian Schär. If you're really struggling for budget, just go for Dan Burn. Moving on to, let's do Van Heck next. Van Heck's in there just because I don't like any of the defenders on wildcard. You could go for Dunk if you wanted to spray the money a bit more, but to be honest, Dunk's attacking threat hasn't been much better than Van Heck's this season, if at all. I think Van Heck's might be even better. Van Heck's also pretty decent for bonus, so I don't think Dunk's offering you that much more. You could go for a Spurs defender. Absolutely, Van Heck could be Van de Ven or Porro. I don't particularly love it. You could go for another Arsenal defender, but would I want to bench boost double Arsenal defence against Man United in 37? Maybe. One feels okay, but I wouldn't want to go double. So it's just process of elimination again. You could go for Dalot, by the way. I'm not tripled up on Man United, so Dalot could go into that Van Heck spot, but double Man United defence is just not the one at the moment. They're so bad. So Van Heck just is in there just because he's cheap, and you might need the money maybe in game week 38 to potentially move to Salah. That money might become useful. So that's the only reason he's in there at the moment. I do have Gvardiol in here, but as I said in the previous section, I don't like this at all. And I do wonder if, again, if Porro's fit, whether Porro and Edison might be better than Vicario and Gvardiol. I just don't think Gvardiol starts every game. Maybe a Walker does, or a Diaz, or you think Stones or a Kanji get more minutes. I honestly have no idea, but if Gvardiol doesn't start every game, he's not ideal. I guess the only game you need him to start, you don't need to play him in game week 35. It would be nice to play him in game week 36, but you don't need to. Really, it's just 37. So maybe if he gets his rest in 35 or maybe 36, that might be ideal for you. But I just don't think you can ever confirm a Man City defender's minutes. But he's in there again. Honestly, if you're on wildcard, you will know the feeling that defenders are just awful at the moment. Like, I've got a lot of injuries to my defence. I'm not even sure who I want to bring in. Which brings us on to probably the easiest pick on wildcard in defence, which is Gabriel. And I didn't think I'd ever say that because the fixtures aren't great. He doesn't double, but Arsenal are just leagues ahead of all of the other defenders or defences. And Gabriel has really decent attacking threat this season. Throws himself at every corner. So I think Gabriel kind of has to be in there due to there being no other good options. Like, can you justify putting Dalot in ahead of Gabriel for one extra fixture? I don't think you can. So I think I would have at least one Arsenal defender. But absolutely, Vicario could be Raya, Van Heck could be Saliba or Wyatt. You could definitely justify having two Arsenal defenders. So that's the defence. It's not looking great, but hopefully the midfield and forward sections make up for it. So moving on to the midfielders, and I think the midfield will be the most template part of the wildcard. I think most wildcards you look at will have at least 4 of these, and a lot of them will have 5, but for good reason. And this is part where I just urge you to just pick the best players. If you think this is the best midfield 5, which at the time of me recording, I probably do, you just pick this midfield 5. I don't think for a second you go different because other wildcarders have it, because most people that are not on wildcard, which is, again, most people, they're not going to have all 5 of these. So just having all 5 in combination is a differential. And most of them justify themselves. So to fly through them, Son and Palmer, easy options. Again, I'm recording this on Monday evening. There are rumours that Palmer is ill. You will obviously see if he plays against Arsenal on Tuesday, and assuming he gets through that fine, I would have Palmer. Even if he doesn't play then, apparently it's just illness, so I would have Palmer. So Son and Palmer, double-double, the best players for each of their teams. From an attacking perspective, you absolutely have both of those. There's no reason to go without either, especially Palmer. He's just so good, and he'll probably be my captain this week. We'll discuss captaincy a bit later in the week, though, because I think there is justification to go for Son. He does like these tighter games against good opposition. It's actually sometimes where Son does his best. But anyway, Palmer and Son you'd absolutely have. I think the next obvious player, but I am seeing an increasing number go without, and I'll explain why, because it does kind of make sense, but I hate it, is Gordon. You have to have Gordon, right? I don't get this thought process of going without Gordon. Well, I do. There are a couple of things. Firstly, we spoke about it. Out of their next 5 games, or their final 5 games, only 2 of them are at home for Newcastle, and they're the better ones that they'd have, like Burnley, Man United, Brentford. These are all really weak defences. It's away. And Gordon in particular is really not good away. Maybe we'll look at this later in the week, but his data is so much better at home. Gordon, I think, has actually only returned twice away from home this season, whereas at home, he just hauls every single time. So, yes, he plays against Sheffield United at home this week, but I do understand that it's not ideal that some of these games are away. I would then even argue, just pick him this week and sell him next week. If you really don't want him, you still have him for this fixture because you're wildcarding this week. You can't not have Gordon against Sheffield United at home this week. But the other reason people are maybe looking to potentially not have Gordon is that combination. So let's say that you do want triple Spurs. Well, you're looking at this, like I said, and the only other Spurs asset you'd want is maybe Porro. But if he's not fit and you don't want Van de Ven, maybe it's like a Maddison or a Richarlison or a Brennan Johnson or even a Timo Werner. But mainly in midfield, it would probably be, I'd imagine, Maddison or Richarlison. You're not going to remove Son, Palmer, and a lot of people love Foden, but Bruno Fernandes that we'll discuss in a second. So it maybe does come down to Gordon. And the thing is, if you go for Maddison in midfield, that means that you then have a free Newcastle spot in the defence. So you could go for Kieran Trippier and Fabian Schär, assuming Trippier's fit, or Dan Burn and Fabian Schär. So it does open up that third Newcastle spot. And I would argue that a Newcastle defender is probably better than Van Heck and maybe Gvardiol. Probably not Gabriel, and maybe even better than some of the goalkeepers if you want to go for a Dubravka or a Pope. So lots of rambling there. But I guess I understand the logic of if you take Gordon out and replace him with someone like Maddison, it not only gives you another attacking doubler for 35 and 37, but it also gives you a free Newcastle spot to play with. But what that then just says to me is you're replacing Gordon with a inferior asset. I think Gordon is better than Maddison this season, at least in the back end of the season. So you're downgrading for me to then bring in another Newcastle defender when Newcastle are one of the worst defences in the league. I know they've improved a little bit recently, but they're still not a good defence. We need to see another 3 or 4 games, which will be the end of the season. But until we can say they're a good defence, nothing has suggested they defend well this season, especially away from home. So I don't love it. For me, Gordon would be so comfortably locked in my wildcard, it's not even funny. So you'll see a lot of people go without, and hopefully I've explained the reasoning for it. And it makes sense, I guess, on paper, but I'm terrified. I'm a non-Gordon owner. I'm even considering doing like Salah to Gordon this week. I think he's that good against Sheffield United at home. And the away fixtures against Burnley and Man United, Gordon really isn't good away, but they're also really bad defenses, so you just never know. So that's Parmesan and Gordon. The other two spots are up for debate. I don't think either of these are fully nailed. I don't think either of these are essential. On Foden, Man City being knocked out of the Champions League really, really helps here. They've obviously got their final of the FA Cup coming up, but that should not be a particularly difficult game, and that won't affect Foden's minutes in 35, 36, maybe even in 37. So I think Foden is a good pick. You'd imagine that Pep goes absolutely full tilt until the league is wrapped up, whether that be for him or against him, probably for him. So Foden's probably going to start every remaining game, or at least get very good minutes in those games. So I think if they were still in the Champions League, you'd go, maybe Foden's not the pick. But I think now you don't have to go for him, but I just think it's so obvious. And people will be debating between Foden and De Bruyne. Foden has just got better data, better goal threat, better overall expected goal involvement, and he is cheaper. And like I said, you might need that money in the future. You might not think it now, but let's say like Van Heck gets injured and you've left like no money in the bank because you've gone for De Bruyne. Like, what do you do then? Like, you've got to go for maybe like a subpar option where you'd like to stretch up to someone else. So I just think going for Foden over De Bruyne for me makes a lot of sense. But that doesn't mean that you don't have Kevin De Bruyne, because I think this fifth spot, right? I think Son, Gordon, Palmer, Foden make the most sense. That fifth spot on Fernandes, I don't think it has to be Fernandes. He will gain a lot of momentum because he's returned quite a lot recently. He's got good fixtures. He is on penalties. He's 90 minutes. I love Bruno Fernandes, right? I'm a Man United fan. I think he's a great FPL option. But content creators are starting to all suggest him. So I think he'll become a bandwagon. But don't feel like you've got to get swept up in this, because there are some good options outside of him. The first being Kevin De Bruyne, right? Because if you drop Gvardiol to, maybe you do go for a Dallo or someone like that, you could then go Foden, De Bruyne, Haaland. That could be so fruitful for you, because City don't keep clean sheets. Their defenders get rotated all over the place. Do I expect De Bruyne and Foden to play most of the remaining Premier League games, at least in the lead up to 37, maybe not in 38? I absolutely do. So you could go for, if you've got similar team value to me, De Bruyne over Fernandes. In that Fernandes spot, you could go for Garnacho. If you've got really poor team value and you're like, Ross, I can't even afford this, then go for Garnacho instead of Fernandes. That works pretty decently. Outside of that, I think it's then Saka and Salah. Now, unless you've got wild team value or you've gone really cheap elsewhere, you're probably not fitting Salah in this spot. But could you go for Saka? Absolutely. And I'm not suggesting you necessarily bench boost with Saka in 37, but you don't have to own Saka for the remainder of the season. You could just own him for a few game weeks, and then in 37, then you look to move him to a potential doubler. But he does have Man United in 37, by the way. Man United do not defend very well. So again, he could even be an okay option. So I guess for me, the four that I would just say like locked on is Son, Gordon, Palmer, Foden, unless we get some sort of update that any of them are serious doubts. Again, I'm recording this before most of the midweek football. But Fernandes is probably that one where I think there's Garnacho, De Bruyne, Saka, Salah, maybe even some other options I've not spoken about here, where I think you could mix it up a bit. I'd love to know down below, if you're on wildcard, is this your locked-in 5? And if it is, don't feel like it's overly template. It's just a genuinely good midfield 5. So guys, moving on to the 3 forwards, and I think 2 of these are relatively easy, but I'll go through them first and then move on to that third and final spot. Erling Haaland is here, but he is flagged and he is apparently a doubt for the Brighton game. Again, at the time of you watching this, you might already know if he's fit and available and back in training. I would say that if Haaland is fit, he is worth having, just because money shouldn't really be an issue, because you don't need Salah because he doesn't double and the fixtures aren't great. Same with Saka. I think most people should have good enough team value where Haaland isn't really a sacrifice. I just don't know who else you go for instead of him. There aren't enough good forwards to choose. So for me, if he's fit and available, you pick him. I would even argue if he's out for 1 week, maybe you still pick him, because you're going to have a major benching headache if you go with this team. You're probably benching Phil Foden in game week 35 if you go with this team. So Haaland being out might just reduce your benching headache, which might be a decent thing. If he's out beyond that, let's say it looks like it could be a few weeks, maybe you go without. Maybe what you do instead is just go for Julian Alvarez and leave the money in the bank to move back to Haaland. Because if Haaland's available for 37 and City haven't wrapped up the league by then, or no one's wrapped up the league by then maybe that's when you just do Alvarez to Haaland with a free transfer. So I don't think there's many situations where I would just remove Haaland, spread the funds even more, and just decide to go without, unless it's looking like he might not even be back for the remainder of the season. But even then, like I said, you could just go for Julian Alvarez and just leave that money in the bank to then open up future opportunities for you. So I think I would have Haaland unless, like I said, long-term injury. Isak is relatively easy, maybe slightly more difficult now because Callum Wilson is back in team training. Whether he's going to be fit enough to start in 35, I'm almost certain he will not be. Then obviously we'll see midweek how many minutes he gets, by the way, because Newcastle do have a midweek fixture. So let's see. Then going into game week 35, if he is fit enough to start, I still think you have Isak, because what you've got with Isak is a player in immense form, the future of the club, assuming they can hang on to him because he's so young. He looks fully fit as well. He's got a nice momentum. It doesn't make much sense for me to drop Isak and start Wilson, or to move Isak out to the left, which is another option, Gordon out to the right, and then Wilson through the middle. Why would you move one of the top scorers in the Premier League who is scoring for fun out to the left? It just doesn't make much sense. What I think we'll see instead is I think Howe will use this as, let's just protect Isak for the remainder of the season to make sure he goes into the summer fully fit and that we don't get any other serious injuries. So I think it might mean that Isak gets subbed off around 70 minutes a little bit more often, which isn't great. But again, considering the lack of options elsewhere, I still think Isak's a relatively easy pick on wildcard. Now, people are asking, do you go for Isak and Wilson? Maybe drop your Newcastle defender or Gordon and just go for the double up on the Newcastle attack. I've seen that a few times. I don't hate it, but I still don't think Wilson starts more than one game for the remainder of the season is my prediction. So what you're doing is picking a bench player. So that might serve you fine in 37. And maybe you only look to start Wilson in game week 37. But for me, I would just go for Isak, Gordon, and then share Trippier, Pope, Dubravka, wherever you want to go with that third and final spot. So with your third forward and the 15th player in the team, this isn't easy either, right? Because let's say that you go for Petrovic. Well, then you don't have a third Chelsea spot. Maybe you could actually go for Petrovic instead of Gusto if Gusto's out, by the way, as I said. So we'll discuss all of that, we've discussed that. But I just think, unless you're going for a double up on the Chelsea defence, which doesn't, I mean, I've got that already in Petrovic and Gusto, but now on paper, doesn't look great. You've got a third Chelsea spot open. As long as he doesn't pick up that 10th yellow, and I should just note, if he gets booked against Arsenal on Tuesday, I'm recording this on Monday evening, if he gets booked against Arsenal, Jackson's not an option. And I'll discuss some other options in a second, because he'll be suspended for 2 games, which means he'll miss the entirety of game week 35. But assuming that he doesn't pick up that yellow, Jackson's data is, I mean, Haaland, Jackson, Isak, if you look at their underlying data, the only player that gets close to them is Darwin, who we're just not going to discuss here. They're 3 of the best forwards in the league for underlying data. Now, Jackson and Haaland haven't always converted that this season. Jackson in particular has been quite frustrating since being in the Prem, but I still don't think Jackson's a bad pick. And I just think, again, who are you choosing outside of it? There are some other options, but they're certainly not great. So for me, Jackson would be in, again, assuming that he doesn't pick up that 10th yellow. If you don't like Jackson, or let's say you've got a third Chelsea elsewhere, you just don't want to triple up on Chelsea, Rasmus Højlund could be a decent shout, because for all that we say about Manchester United defensively, they are still normally getting at least like 8 to 10 shots a game, and he will get usually one opportunity in the game. My concern with Højlund, and the reason that he's not in here, is I don't think Højlund's main responsibility, this is going to sound crazy, I know, I don't think he's been set up with his sole responsibility as scoring goals. I think what he's been tasked with, if you watch the games, is dragging the defence all over the place. He's an absolute runner. His movement is very, very good, but we don't look to be trying to find him. We're not whipping in a lot of crosses. And in general, when I watch, I'm just like, he's making lots of good runs, which pulls the defenders out the way, which leaves space for the likes of Garnacho, Fernandes, Anthony. God, I hate our team. Whoever's available to exploit those spaces if they are. It's why I actually think that Garnacho has been really good recently, because of Højlund. Højlund's running is immense, but from an FPL perspective, you can see his underlying data is really, really poor. And I just don't think I'd prefer to have Jackson over Højlund, assuming that he is fit and he doesn't pick up that 10th yellow. The only thing that I think you gain with Højlund is I think you are more assured of minutes. I think there is a good chance that in one of these games, not more than one, I think it would only be one, that Jackson maybe starts one on the bench, and you maybe just get something like Sterling in the false 9 or Palmer in the false 9, and they just give him a bit of a rest, because he has played a lot of games and he's not always been in the best of form. So there is a chance that you don't get every game with him, but I still think it's worth the risk. The only other option I can think of is actually the player that I own, which is João Pedro. If I was choosing fresh now, I had all of the money and the transfers in the world, I don't know that I'd be picking JP, but he's still the same option as he was last week when I brought him in. So maybe it's just because he blanked in game week, was it 33 against Burnley? Maybe I'm just like, oh, he blanked against Burnley, I don't want him, because still good data, still penalties, still the same set of fixtures. I suppose you just don't have the same entry point, right? My entry point in 33 was Burnley, whereas now it's Bournemouth, I think, and then they've got Villa. So it's not the perfect set of fixtures, but as a cheaper option, if you don't want to go for a triple Chelsea again, João Pedro, because you can bench him most weeks, and if you need him, he's there, he's not an awful option. But I think for me, that final spot would be between Jackson Hoyle and João Pedro. I think I would just about lean towards Jackson at the moment. So that is the 15. Again, I am recording this on Monday evening, which means I don't have lots of information around injuries, rotation, what happens in the midweek games. This could change quite a bit. What would not change is I would have triple City, 100%, whether it's Guardiola, Ederson, or De Bruyne alongside Foden and Haaland. I'd have triple Newcastle, and non-negotiables for me would be Gordon and Isak. You just put whatever defender in you want. I would probably have double or maybe triple Chelsea. Probably triple, but double at the very least. I would have at least double Spurs. Here it's Vicario and Son. Could end up being Pedro Porro if he's fit. I would then have at least one, maybe two Man United assets, Casilla, Onana, and Fernandes. Van Heck also doubles. And then I've got Gabriel in there as well, just because he's such an elite defender. So what you've got here, if I'm not mistaken, hopefully I'm not, is you've got 14 out of 15 doubling. The only one player that you've got that does not double in game week 37, I should say, is Gabriel. But could you bench boost with Gabriel? Could he keep a clean sheet or get a goal? Absolutely. And you've also got 2 free transfers. Now, I don't recommend booking in transfers, and it's one key piece of advice if you're still watching at this point. By the way, if you're still watching, like the video, make sure to subscribe. I do really appreciate it. But I wouldn't book in transfers for 36 and 37. I wouldn't say in 36 I'm going to do Gabriel to this player, and 37 I'm going to do this. Because I guarantee in the next 2 weeks you're going to get issues. Like, look at just this week alone. You doggies out for the season. Gusto might be injured. Palmer's ill. Like, we just get utter chaos constantly in FPL. So I would try to book in 0 transfers until maybe game week 38. At the very most, maybe book in 1 for either 36 or 37. I think if you booked in both of your free transfers for 36 and 37, it's just likely to go very wrong. And then also, there's a very good chance you probably want to carry 2 free transfers forward to game week 38 to buy the likes of Saka and Salah because they've got really good fixtures in 38. So ideally, you're probably only making 1 transfer anyway in 37 and you're rolling the second one through. Right, I'll stop rambling there. I'm not on wildcard this week, but I have given this a bit of thought. Hopefully it has been useful for you. And let me know down below how different this wildcard is from your current draft. So guys, there you have it. That is my complete Game Week 35 wildcard guide. Hopefully it has been useful for you. And if it has, please smash that like button. And if you are new around here, do make sure to subscribe. I do really appreciate it. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.